Attachment theory is all the rage these days. Everywhere you look, there are videos and blogs talking about how understanding attachment styles is the key to healthier and happier relationships. But here's the problem no one's talking about. When it's misused, attachment theory can actually make your relationships way more toxic. So in this video, we're going to dive into the dark underbelly of attachment theory, how it can go horribly wrong and sabotage the very relationships it's meant to help. But more importantly, what you can do instead to build the secure, loving bond that you deserve. So if you're ready, let's dive in. So let's face it, attachment theory has become the go-to explanation for a lot of relationship issues right now. You know, your partner's distant, well, they must be avoidant. If you're feeling a bit anxious about the relationship, then slap an anxious attachment label on it and call it a day. But here's the thing, while attachment theory can offer some insights, relying on it can actually do a lot more harm than good. So for those of you who aren't familiar, attachment theory is based on the idea that we all develop certain styles of relationships based on our early childhood experiences. If you had a secure, stable bond with your parents, then congrats, you're more likely to have a secure attachment style, which means that you're pretty comfortable with intimacy and trust. But if your early relationships were a bit more rocky, then you might develop an anxious avoidant or even fearful avoidant style of attachment. So while all of this is straightforward enough, the problem is that these can be used as labels and as a way to almost diagnose and pigeonhole our partners. So, oh, you're just acting out your anxious attachment style again, or, you know, I can't help being distant, I'm an avoidant type. All of a sudden, these styles transform and become an excuse for poor communication, lack of effort, incompatibility, and even just straight up toxic behavior. Because this is a bias that we can fall for, called the fundamental attribution error. So the fundamental attribution error is where we assign someone's behavior to their character flaws rather than the environment that they're in. So for example, let's say your partner comes home and is upset and they go upstairs without saying anything. And you think to yourself, well, there's the anxious avoidant attachment style again. In thinking this way regularly, you start to blame your partner's character rather than the environment around them, which has a massive influence. So for example, stresses at work, home, with family, colleagues, etc. In leaning on their attachment style and blaming their character, it means that you treat them with a lot less nuance. So maybe you start to avoid certain topics, or you bypass certain conversations because you decide this is their ingrained character. So why even bother talking about it? This is deep set within them as a person. So the truth is, attachment styles aren't a life sentence. They're not some immutable personality trait that dooms you to a lifetime of unfulfilling relationships or incompatibility. In fact, a lot of experts argue that overemphasis on attachment styles can backfire big time. You see, when we get caught up in labeling ourselves or our partners, this starts to create a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a negative feedback loop. So if you're convinced that you are anxious and your partner's avoidant, you can start to interpret every little interaction with them through that lens. Suddenly a missed text becomes proof that they're pulling away rather than just a sign that they're busy at work. Again, you're blaming character over environment. And when you approach every conflict with the assumption that it's all down to clashing attachment styles, you begin to miss out on the opportunity to actually listen, empathize, dig in, and connect with your partner. But it gets worse. Some people can actually use attachment theory as a weapon. They weaponize it. So they'll diagnose their partner as anxious or avoidant and then use that label against them to avoid taking responsibility for their own behavior. So for example, I'm not being distant, you're just being needy because you're attachment style. Or if you were more secure, then you wouldn't be so upset about this. This in itself can turn into a toxic cycle that leaves both partners feeling misunderstood, invalidated, and stuck. It can be a real problem. So what is the alternative? How do we move beyond the pitfalls of attachment theory and build the kind of secure, loving relationships that we all crave? Well, it starts with shifting our focus from labels to actual behavior. Instead of getting caught up in diagnosing each other's attachment styles, actually focus on creating an emotionally safe environment where both partners can feel safe, they can feel heard, and they can feel respected. This is about cultivating emotional safety between you both, where you can take the time to really listen to each other's needs and fears without judgment or defensiveness. This is about connecting one-on-one rather than label to label. And this may sound easier said than done, but the truth is no amount of attachment theory, knowledge, or labels can substitute the skills of building trust, building communication, and cultivating a mutual understanding between you both. Being able to show up for each other no matter what is happening around you both. So what does that actually look like in practice? How do we create that kind of secure, supportive dynamic, regardless of attachment styles or labels? Well, here are some key principles. First up is self-awareness. And no, I'm not talking about slapping a anxious or avoidant label on yourself and calling it a day. I mean, real, deep, nuanced reflection on your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own behaviors. Thinking about what triggers your insecurities and how you specifically tend to react when you're feeling vulnerable. What unmet needs do you have, or old wounds might be influencing the way that you show up in your relationship? Digging into your own patterns is a really powerful first step. But don't stop there. The next piece of the puzzle is open, honest communication. Actually talking to your partner about what's going on for you without blame or judgment. So being vulnerable and saying things like, hey, when you take a while to respond to my texts, I start to feel a little bit anxious. Could we maybe talk about that? This is instead of silently stewing or lashing out. And in these instances, it's really important to manage your emotions and start to develop that emotional intelligence in order to understand when you are feeling scared or vulnerable or insecure. But of course, this kind of vulnerability requires a certain level of emotional safety, and that's where the real work comes in. Crafting emotional safety means practicing empathy even when you don't fully understand your partner's perspective. Once you start to generate emotional safety for your partner by being able to empathize, being able to understand, and being able to show your partner that they can express themselves and their feelings fully, then that will be able to generate emotional safety for you. Once your partner feels comfortable being able to express themselves, then it becomes a lot easier for them to be able to take the time to listen to you expressing yourself. And this means being willing to own your shit, apologize when you've messed up, work on healing your own wounds instead of projecting them onto your partner. For others, it might mean learning new communication skills or working with a coach. The specifics will look different for everyone, but at its core, it's about prioritizing your own growth and your own development, and then showing up for your partner with as much compassion and integrity as is needed. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, let me give you an example. One of my members that I've worked with lately actually came to me convinced that him and his partner's attachment styles were just not compatible. So as we worked together, he started to build the skills to be able to craft a more nuanced environment between himself and his partner. And slowly but surely, Alex managed to start talking to his wife on a much more intimate level, which in turn helped her change her behavior and tweak her behavior and build the trust between them both. Now, I'm not saying that this is a quick fix. These things take time and effort and practice. But this is time and effort in the right ways. The general anxiety and avoidance that had once dominated Alex's relationship has started to now be replaced with a much deeper sense of security and connection. And I'm actually planning on having an interview with Alex and his partner in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. And if you want the chance to work with me directly to turn your relationship around, then join me on my free relationship bootcamp, where I'll take you through the steps to craft yourself a thriving relationship. Click on the link in the description down below to get started. And here's the thing, this kind of transformation is possible for anyone. The myth of it takes two to tango is BS. It takes one person to be able to craft the environment for a healthy relationship and be able to show your partner the emotionally safe environment to be able to develop those communication skills together. So this is possible for any relationship, no matter what your attachment style or relationship history might be. Relationships are not about finding the perfect partner or diagnosing each other's issues and having this prerequisite of compatibility. Once you know the right skills and principles, then it's much easier to show up in the right ways day after day. So the main point that I want to make is just be a little more critical about what relationship advice you're taking on and how you're using it. And if you want a deeper dive on which relationship advice to actually trust, then I'll leave you with this video right here. I'll see you over there.